In this video, we're going to learn some tips and tricks on how to multiply signed integers. To begin, let's discuss what multiplication actually represents. So multiplication represents what is called repeated addition. And because really what we're doing is because we're repeatedly adding the same number a certain number of times. So for example, say we have 4 times 5. Most of you already know off the top of your head that 4 times 5 is equal to 20. But let's break this down a little bit further. What this is actually saying is we have 4 groups of 5. So we have 4 groups of 5 that are really being added together. So we have 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. So you can see where this notion of repeated addition comes in because we are repeatedly adding 5 together 4 times. So now if we use our addition strategies here, we'd add the first 2 together, so we'd get 10. Then we'd add the second 2 together, so we'd have 15. And that ultimately equals 20. So when you're multiplying, what you're really doing is you are repeatedly adding the same number together that many times. Now where multiplication does start to get a little bit tricky is when we have signed integers. So for example, say we had something like -3 times 2 or -4 times -6. Once we start throwing those negatives and positives in there, that can get a little bit tricky. So there are 2 rules that we need to remember when we are multiplying 2 integers together. So this first rule here that you should be recording into your notes says when multiplying 2 integers with the same sign. So same sign means they are identical. So this would be something like a positive times a positive, or a negative times a negative. So when we're multiplying 2 integers together that contain the same sign, the result will be positive. So that means if you have a positive number times a positive number, so something like 3 times 2, that's going to equal a positive 6 because it's 2 numbers with the same sign. Similarly, if we have 2 negative numbers, so like -3 times -2, that will also equal a positive 6. So if you have 2 numbers with the same sign being multiplied, your result is going to be positive. Then on the flip side of all of that, when you're multiplying 2 integers with different signs, so say you have a positive times a negative, or a negative times a positive. When this is the case and we're multiplying 2 numbers with 2 different signs, the result will be negative. So for example, say we had a positive 3 times a -2. 2 different signs make it a -6. Same thing with -3 times a positive 2. 2 different signs make it a -6. So we're going to use this as we start multiplying and remembering these multiplication rules. If you multiply 2 integers with the same sign, it's positive. If you multiply 2 integers with different signs, the result is negative. So let's practice multiplying with the 4 different problems you see on the screen. So this first one has 10 times -3. So already this is telling me that we are going to have a negative result because I have a positive number times a negative number. And I know if I'm multiplying 2 numbers with different signs, the result is going to be negative. Now, some of you might know the answer straight off the bat, but if you don't, let's try to write this out. So this is saying we have 10 groups of 3. And you can disregard the symbol right now because we already know our answer is going to be negative. So we have 10 groups of 3. So 1, 2, 3, there's one group. So we'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have 10 groups of 3. So we can make this very visual for you if you're not good with multiplication. So draw it out. We have 10 groups with 3 in each group. And then all we need to do is count. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So I know that my answer of 10 times 3 is 30, and then because I have a positive times a negative, my result is a negative 30. So now let's go and take a look at part B. So part B, we have 7 groups of 5 is what that's saying. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And each one of those groups has 5. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 4 of the groups. 5, 6, 7. So here I can see I have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. And because I have a positive times a positive, 2 numbers with the same sign, I know my answer is a positive 35. Moving on to part C. So here I have a negative times a negative. So 2 numbers with the same sign, negative times a negative is going to give me a positive result. And then I have 4 groups of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then if I add them all together, so this accounts for 6. Then I add on 6 more, and that's 12. 6 more, and that's 18. 6 more, and that is 24. So negative 4 times negative 6 gives me a positive 24. And then finally here I have D, which is negative 5 times 7. So here I have a negative times a positive, 2 different numbers with 2 different signs, so my result is going to be negative. Then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups of 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7. So there's a second group, so that accounts for 14. Then I add on 7 more, that's 21. 7 more gives me 28. And 7 more gives me 35. So negative 5 times positive 7 is a negative 35. So if you struggle with multiplication, draw out the groups. Draw it out, use the rules to help you, and you will get better at multiplying. So the last thing we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at what happens if we have multiple multiplications. So just like addition and subtraction, we are going to evaluate these from left to right. So we always start with the leftmost 2 and then we go in pairs across. So if we start with example 1 here, we have 4 times 5 times negative 2. So 4 times 5 results in 20. And then I still have the negative 2 left, so 20 times negative 2 should give me negative 40. So it's as simple as just going left to right. All right, looking at the next example. We start with the 2 on the left. Negative 2 times negative 4. Well, negative times a negative is a positive, and that results in a positive 8. Then 8 times 7, so we have 8 groups of 7. So this one might be a helpful one to draw out if you struggle with multiplication. 8 times 7, if you draw out the 8 groups of 7, you will eventually find that 8 times 7 results in a 56. Then from here, if we move on to this next one, so here we have from left to right, negative 1 times negative 3. Negative times a negative is a positive, and 1 times 3 is 3. So then I still have a couple more multiplications to do. So I do 3 times negative 5. Well, positive times a negative is a negative, and 3 times 5 is 15. And then negative 15 times 2 is a negative 30. Then if I move on to number 4, here we go from left to right again. So negative times a negative is a positive, so that gives me a positive 8. Then I have 8 times negative 3, so a positive times a negative is a negative. 8 groups of 3, if I draw that out and think that through, I find that 8 times 3 would give me 24. So there I have my negative 24. And then here I have a negative times a negative, which is going to result in a positive value. And 24 times 2 gives me 48. Now, one other thing I want us to notice throughout this whole process is I want you to take note of how many negatives there were in each problem. So here there was 1 negative. Here there were 2 negatives. Here there were 3 negatives. And here there were 4 negatives. So there's actually a trick when we're dealing with multiplication, and we can determine our final result if it's going to be positive or negative. And it all has to do with looking at how many negatives are contained in the problem. So if you look closely here, when you have an odd number of negatives, like 1 or 3, the result is negative. So if you have an odd number of negatives in the problem, the result, if you're multiplying, I'll put that in parentheses, is also going to be negative. However, if you look down here, if you have an even number like 2 or 4, the result will be positive. So if you have an even number of negatives being multiplied in your problem, that result of multiplication will be positive. So be on the lookout for those trickier multiplication problems that might result in a positive or a negative depending on how many multiplications they have in them.